Good evening, everyone. Just a recap before we jump in. So tonight's purpose had two parts to this meeting. The first is to review capital resolution of the projects that are up for approval for this next fiscal year, and to set a referendum date for approval of that capital plan. That's the first formal public portion of this meeting. And then secondly, in this open public hearing portion, the Board of Finance will review this upcoming budget year's overview of the budget. Okay. So on the special town meeting portion of the meeting, is there a motion to waive the reading of the call of the meeting? Thank you, Bob. A second from anyone? Jean, thank you. Any questions from anyone? Now, all those in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. Secondly, is there a motion to waive the reading of the rather lengthy resolution by the town attorney? Tara, thank you. Any second? Jean, thank you. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Bob Belvin and Ryan Hoffman to help us with the capital.
I have a very brief part of this. I wanted to talk about why we're here as a town meeting. And for those of you who are new to the process, we vote on the budgets generally the third week of May. Leading up to that, we have a budget presentation and a setting of that specific date at our annual town meeting, which is the first Tuesday of May. So that's all ahead of us, and tonight, it's as part of the process, the Board of Finance does a public hearing gathering for the public and share where they are as we speak. Capital is a unique piece of that overall budget process. In our charter, it says that if you have capital that would go to be borrowed in the amount of over $1 million, it also goes to referendum. And we want that referendum to be on the same day, so we all only go vote once. But that setting the date of that referendum has to be 45 days in advance of the referendum. So there's a bit of a disconnect between when you set the date for the capital project part of the referendum and the date that we set the budget part of the referendum. So tonight we had to have a town meeting to actually make one motion, which is to set a date of that referendum, and then we will then hopefully at the exact same date when we move to the annual town meeting for the rest of the budget. So there's really just two parts of this budget, and we're just trying to get it coordinated so that when we really do vote on it, it's on the same day, right? And so that's why this is in two parts tonight. So the first part is an official town meeting to take official action of the town. The second part is informational to gather input and to share. And Brian and I will do this first part. It's actually should be pretty straightforward. And then we will take a pause and the Board of Finance will come up and then run the remainder. And we will adjourn the town meeting at that point. So if I could go to the next chart. Just for clarity, in terms of overall capital projects, there is bonding in the amount of $2.9 million, and from other sources, in particular from excess revenues this year of a little over $400,000. In addition to that, for clarity, there are almost $3 million in the regular budget of capital items paid in cash, and then some other buckets that are paid out of reserves we've been setting aside, some paid from the EMS fund, and some paid from the outside police services fund. So there's a whole process that would go through that, and I know Brian, between the two presentations that are going to go on, I'm going to talk about all of that before we're done. So I just wanted to make sure that it was as clear as you can be on this process where there's two different cycles, what we're doing at the meeting, at this meeting, and then what we're doing at the second meeting, which kind of is a bigger picture of everything. So Brian, I'll turn it to you.
And you get a holistic view of all of those numbers. So we're going to focus on the two top numbers, the 2.88 and the excess revenue number in this meeting. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Hoffman. I'm on the Board of Finance. I was also the chairman of the Ad Hoc Capital Committee, which is integral into how we run our capital budget process. So for those who don't understand it, what really happens, it's a very rigorous process. In the fall, all of the departments in the town and on the Board of Education side put in a very detailed list of capital projects that they want to have done, as well as a 10-year plan of kind of their outlook of how we'll spend or have our needs for capital over 10 years. The Capital Committee, which is 4 members, myself and 3 others from different people in the town, come together and we meet with each of the departments and go through every line item in their request. And what we're really looking to help with is understand the need, understand a prioritization, and at the end of going through this, we have multiple meetings over the course of a month plus, make a recommendation to the selectmen and to the Board of Finance on our view of what the budget for the capital projects should be. That goes, you can see the first selectman takes a look at it, and Steve made some changes to the recommendation that came out of the Capital Committee. It went to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen made some changes to what came from Steve, and then it went into the Board of Finance. Again, we went through a very detailed process, not quite as detailed, obviously, as the Capital Committee did, because we did that work for them. But we actually made a few changes as well. So it gets looked at a lot, and it really gets honed to be as close as it can be to meet all the needs we have, but with the affordability that we can afford. So that's the process that gets followed to what is coming before you today. So what I'm going to do now is just spend a couple minutes on what is in those 2 primary numbers. And what I'll do as I go through these, it's not highlighted, but I'll point out which ones are going to be bonded and which ones are coming out of that excess revenue. So there's really 3 areas that are the biggest drivers of our capital needs. The first is public safety, and the biggest one being the top one, which is the dispatch and records management system for the police. So the system that we have is really beyond end of life, so getting a new system in place and one that will actually be able to live on for a significant period of time is kind of one of the top priorities. It was actually looked at last year, but the police actually did a great job of vetting this being the right solution. So that's the biggest number on this chart, and that is the only item on the list that will be bonded. Everything else on the list will be paid for through excess revenue. Every year we buy 3 new police vehicles. That keeps our kind of 9 kind of fresh vehicles going for the police. So that's the price for the first 2 vehicles, and then the third one is being paid by the outside services fund, the police outside services fund. Then you can see some smaller items. The Brookfield Volunteer Fire, sorry for all the acronyms, Brookfield Volunteer Fire has 2 major ones. The first is a compressor to fill their air tanks that they use, because their compressor really doesn't work anymore. And then we're buying gas meters for both fire companies, which detect hazardous gas. So if they're going into an environment, they can make sure they're not being exposed or no one else is being exposed to hazardous gas. So very important safety items there. The health department it's going to be part of what you'll see on the education side, but we're going to be working on putting public water into Wiskander Middle School, and this is an initial study that needs to be done that the health department will drive to get that going. And then the cost for putting the water system in place will be on the education side. And then a few small requests from the general government. It's a little bit of IT for some end-of-life things, some Chromebooks for the land use commissioners, and a fence around the community garden, so which is a really good value for the community. The second big area is our public works, and this is an area that we've I think we've been underinvesting in for some time. If you look at the first 2 items, and again, the first 2 on the list will be bonded, everything else will come out of our excess funds. So the dump trucks, you can think of those as the plow trucks, if you will. That truck that we're replacing was bought in 2004, so over 21 years old, it's rusting out. We should be replacing it more frequently than that. So we're trying the best as possible to catch up and get more of our fleet to be being replaced when it needs to be. The backhoe, the second one, is a year 2000 backhoe. So again, it's about 25 years old, way beyond the useful life of that backhoe, and it gets used almost on an everyday basis. How do I do that? Sorry. So those are the two big items as well. So then you can see some small items, mostly make sure that we're not going to have some problems going forward. So air conditioning in the server room, which you need to keep servers cool at the police station. The gables need to be repaired in the library. If they don't, the library will get water damage and we'll have a much bigger expense there. Some improvements to the well for the municipal center. And then the senior center, the air conditioning needs to be replaced there. It's going to be about $120,000, but it comes in 3 zones for people that know air conditioning. So we're doing the first zone this year, and the intent would be to do the next 2 zones over the next 2 years. So, you know, it's kind of an affordable way to get that done. From a Parks and Rec, not a lot of request here. We're replacing it's a RTV is like an ATV, but a big one, you know, commercial ATV kind of. So again, the one that they're using now is well beyond the useful life. It's a 2007, so that's 18 years old, and those only really should last 18 years. And then even though it's only $6,000, I want to highlight this because it shows the work that goes on, and this was done by the Board of Finance. But the Parks and Rec requested a new pickup truck because their old one's from 2001, and that would have been $66,000. But with some good work, we were able to find another truck elsewhere in the town that for $6,000 of basically repairs, that can be used by Parks and Rec. So by kind of getting creative here, that was able to save the town $60,000 by being able to kind of reuse an existing truck instead of buying a new one. So, you know, a good use of, good savings for the town and good use of our time to help find them. And then finally, the school. I think most people are aware that a few years ago, a 10-year study was put in place on what we needed to do to bring the high school and the middle school kind of fully up and to keep them so that they're good environments for our students and our teachers to work in, but also so that those buildings can be around and we won't have to build new high school or a new middle school. So the plan was a 10-year, $12 million plan. And this is year 2 of it. So the budget we're in right now, we fully funded the first year of that plan. This fully funds the second year of the plan. And you can see what's in there. It's replacing roofs. It's improving the ventilation. There is actually something that was not in the plan is a server upgrade. So for the security systems in both schools, the servers were not adequate to do what we needed to do from a safety perspective. So we actually figured out a way to get that into this plan. We actually deferred something else that was in the 10-year plan out a year or 2 so that we can get that into the plan. And then replacing the middle school gym floor to a new floor that's honestly more safe for the kids is also there as well. So all of this would be bonded. And that's about $2.2 million on the chart. So it went very quickly, but you can see it's not a huge list. It's a very targeted list of things that the town really needs to keep ourselves operating effectively. So I will turn it back.
Thank you, Brian and Bob. So at this point, we will open up the room to any questions or clarity that anybody has or comments. If you do have a question or a comment, I just ask that you provide us your name and address for the records. Anybody have anything? Yes?
Yeah, my name is Peter Foshi, 3 Road.
Peter, can you come up to the mic?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you got me.
Name is Peter Foshi, 3 Greenview Road. The question is, what are the outside service funds? Where do they come from? And also the transfer of the excess funds from the budget into the capital. How is that handled?
I can handle the first one. Okay. So the excess service fund, and there's a few of them, but this is particularly the police excess service fund.
Okay.
So I think you'll frequently see that there's construction on the side of the road and there's a Brookfield police car there, you know, that's helping direct traffic and all that.
Right.
So that work is actually not being done kind of by the town and funded by the town. The people that are doing that construction pay for our services. Now, the police get paid to do that. They're all, you know, off duty, but they're getting paid to do that. But there's an excess amount that we get above what the police get paid. So that gets put into a fund. And then at certain points, if there's something that we need typically, for the police, if there's something that they need that we can't necessarily fit in the budget, we can use that fund if we all agree. So it goes to the boards, the police usually request it, and that's how that gets used. And then the second piece was, how does the money get?
How does it get, actually transferred? If you have a surplus from the budget.
Right.
You're not servicing debt with it, or you're not going to reduce
Right.
the budget itself, you're transferring that into the
Yeah,
capital.
so each year, we look to see if there is a surplus. A surplus could be, we brought in more revenue, we had less expenditures, and we also have some contingency, maybe we didn't need to use that, right? I don't know, policy might be stronger, but the principle that we use is whenever there's a surplus, we try to take half of that and put it into our fund balance. Think of it as the rainy day fund, right? So we don't spend that, and then we say half of it we can use to see other capital projects that we need to do that maybe we couldn't afford otherwise, and we use about half of it to fund those projects. So that's the principle that we use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody else? No? Okay, then I will close this portion of the meeting. And as I said earlier, there is no vote this evening on these capital projects. They will be handled at a public referendum that we will now make a motion to set that date. So I'd like to ask for a motion from the floor to set Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. at, I've been doing this for 4 years and I always get this wrong. Sorry, apologize. 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. as the date and time for the capital projects referendum on the same date as the budget referendum. Could I have a motion to that? Peter, thank you. And a second? George, thank you. Any questions on that? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Very good. Thank you. And at this point, I will close this special town meeting portion of our meeting, and I will invite the Board of Finance up for the second half of our meeting.
Let's do this. We'll start it up now. Where's Mary? Susan, Mary comes back. Start up. We can wait till 7:30. I got one night. I got all that.
like to call to order this public hearing in the Board of Finance presentation to the town. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Brian for his presentation on the Capitol. I think it was explained as well as we all understand it, so I appreciate all the hard work that went into it. And now we'll turn it over to Brian to go through the budget presentation.
So I'm back. I think everyone knows all the members of the board. I mean, it's not here yet. I think she's going to show. But as I said in the Capitol, the same applies here. The Board of Finance spent an inordinate amount of time really getting into all of the details of this plan. I think it's a very well thought out, and it fits into our town strategy very well. So I hope you'll agree when you hear this. From a meeting perspective, that's very quickly our agenda. I'll go through. I'll try to be fairly quick, and then there should be plenty of time for public comment. So if I go too fast, please feel free to ask questions on it. If I went too quick, just some key dates to consider. Today we're at the top of it on April 1st, where we're having our hearing. The board will take any feedback that we get today, or up until the 9th, as we have our next meeting, and as we review, potentially revise what we've brought in today. This all leads up to the annual town meeting on the 6th, and then expect to have the referendum on around May 20th. And should the budget fully pass, then the mill rate would be set by June 4th. So that's roughly what the calendar will be. As we get into this, I'm going to, I'm kind of following, if you've been in these meetings before, I'm kind of following how we've done it in the past. I want to spend the first couple slides just giving some context on how the town is operating financially, what we're thinking about, so you really understand the overall context of where we're at, and then we'll get into the specifics of the budget after that. Okay, but I think this will be very helpful. So from the board's perspective, we really have three fundamental things that we're thinking about when we work on a budget. The first one is we want to make sure that we're properly funding the town and our education services, but we got to do that in a way with a tax burden that's acceptable to the town's members, right? So that's everything that everyone probably thinks about when they think about a budget. At the same time, we all think very carefully about how we're managing our debt, right? So we've increased our debt pretty significantly over the last few years with the Kaywood Lake Elementary School. There's a lot of proposals being talked about now, police station, community center, library, etc. So really thinking carefully about how much debt we can afford, how we manage through it is integral to how you do a budget. And then third is we want to make sure that we're maintaining the financial health of our town. So I think most people know that there are rating agencies that rate towns and towns' debt. AAA is the highest rating you can get. Our town is rated AAA, and we want to maintain that best rating that you can get. And you do that by really focusing on the amount of debt that you have, your ability to service that debt, and our fund balance and our fund balance growth. And again, fund balance is how much money we have in reserve. Sometimes I call it a rainy day fund, if you will, but it's money available should things come up that you need to spend money on that you haven't thought about, basically. So those are kind of the three things that we're trying to work on as we do this. I'm going to talk about those just quickly. So the first one from affordability. We've looked at every element of the town's spending. So education, public safety, public works, culture and rec, and town administration. Right? Each of those departments came in to the Board of Finance. We went through their budgets line item by line item in a lot of detail. Drilled down in areas where there were big spend areas where there was a lot of sensitivity or variability, but really got into the details on this stuff. As we look coming out of it, we know that inflation is going to be a potential issue, and we know that that benefits costs are rising. So medical benefits for the upcoming year are estimated to grow by 11.5%. So that's a big increase that we're going to have to work through. kind of focus on that. And then there's a lot of uncertainty going forward, right? There's federal and state funding, there's other areas. So we wanted to make sure that we were very carefully considering the things we knew, but we also built a plan that would have some flexibility for things that we don't know if they're going to happen or not. And you'll see that as we go forward. And I talked a little bit about how we met the goal, right? But we did a very significant review of all the requests. We did focus on expenses outside of management control. And we continued to fund contingency. So we put away about 0.5% of our operational budget each year to be prepared if things come up that we weren't aware of when the budget hit. So we're able to continue to do that. So that's kind of how we make sure we're properly managing the spending and budget. The second, from a bonded debt perspective. If you look, and for those that were in the last meeting, we have underinvested a little bit over time in some of our areas. Our vehicle inventory is old, right? And so we have to make sure that we're trying to catch up on that as best as possible, even though we have to maintain affordability. The second is the repayment of our existing debt. So with the about $70 million of debt that we took out to fund Candlewood Lake Elementary School, our debt repayment is going to peak this year. In the upcoming year, the amount that we have to pay is the highest that it will be going forward. Again, unless some new investment is decided by the town. But based on what we know today, it is peaking this year. So trying to make sure that we kind of recover from somewhat underinvesting and from maintaining this bond peak, and knowing that we have some large investments coming our way, we really have to be careful in how we're managing that debt. You can see what we did here. So as we went forward, we tried to get more of our capital being funded through cash through the budget as opposed to just being bonded. So that we don't have as much increasing in debt. And I'll show in a few charts, actually the amount of debt that we have on the books is coming down. We are trying to use more grants, so you'll see that we have applied for some grants. We are applying for additional grants, which actually will help our budget if we get them. Obviously, the more grants we get, the less tax burden we have. The board this year built a debt policy so that we have an ongoing way of thinking about debt, thinking about what should be bonded, how much is an affordable amount of debt to have, etc. A lot of work went into that, but now we kind of have a set of a policy that we can look at and use on a going forward basis as we continue to run the town. And then I talked in the last meeting, I know most of you were still here, about how the capital committee operates. So that committee is underway, and we're continuing to focus now more on long-term planning, not just budgeting planning, so that we are kind of getting ahead of our capital needs. So that's the second report. I wanted for people who like to see more graphics. This is the amount of bonded debt that we have outstanding and would expect to have outstanding given what is in this year's budget. So it's kind of hard to see the colors, but the bottom is the WPCA, the middle is our town bonds, and then the top is the school. So you can see that in the last couple of years, Candlewood Lake has caused our overall debt to go up over $100 million, call it $110 million. But that peaked in 2023. So as of 2023, our amount of debt outstanding is going down. And in 2026, even with the $2.88 million investment that we're proposing we make, we still will reduce our debt by about $3.6 million. One of the reasons I think this is really important is because, this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, you often hear the debt bubble being talked about. What we did several years, 2 years ago, is we took out basically a $70 million mortgage to buy Candlewood Lake Elementary School. So that is not a bubble that's going to go up real quick and come down real quick. We're paying off a 20-year mortgage. So you can see how that goes. Now, if we decide that we're going to invest in a new police station, community center, library, etc., then there will be an increase in the out years. But this is the model that we can look at to see what is affordable and where will we be. I think that's important for people to understand. A key metric on how much debt you have is not the absolute amount, but is how much debt you have as a percent of your revenue. This chart's probably really hard to read, but these are all of the key counts that we look at. The second bar, the one that's light green, is our debt to revenue that we ended, or mid-2023, when that budget year ended. And with the school coming in, we knew it was going to be high, and it is very high. When we exit this plans year, it'll be the second green bar. So we're making significant progress in getting our debt as a percent of revenue back down to the level that we would like it to be, much closer to our peers. So it's not necessarily concerning. We knew that this was going on, and we were planning for that bump up, but it's important that we bring that down, and we are doing that in this budget cycle. And then finally, this is how much we pay each year for that debt. The mustard color is the principal that we're repaying, and the green color is the interest that we pay. So 2026, you can see that we've been growing and we peak. That's why I said our debt repayment peaks this year. It goes down a little bit the next couple of years, kind of pops up, but still not as high as 2026. So it's going to start coming down again unless we decide to make another major investment. But you can see the biggest driver is repaying the principal. The amount of interest that we're paying is starting to come down. That's good, right? I'm just paying interest. But paying off that principal is the biggest chunk of that. So this is not going down anytime soon really dramatically, but it's on the right path. So that's kind of the debt view. The third piece, which I talked about, is maintaining that the financial health really focused on our fund balance growth. So I'm going to show you a chart, but what we've done this year is we're really being careful on how much of our fund balance we're using to lower the debt burden. So if you look in the middle of the box, in the last couple of years, we used we used 1.385 and then a little over 2 million in the last 2 years. This year in this budget, we're only proposing to use 1.2 million, so less and much less than last year, less than the prior 2 years of that fund balance to help offset our taxes. So that means that we are not taking from that fund balance as much as we have in the past, which will make our town stronger. When we issued debt in October 2024, S&P, Standard & Poor's, is the company that rates our debt, rated it AAA, and I just put a few of the highlights that they said when they affirmed that we are the highest rating you can get. That we have positive performance, we have regular long-term planning and long-term policies, and we have very manageable debt and pension costs. So good, strong words that we're managing our financials very well in town. What this chart shows on the left side, the bar chart on the left, is our fund balance. So we've increased our fund balance steadily for the last 8 years. Oh, sorry. Okay. Thanks, Bob. So we've increased our fund balance steadily for the last 8 years, and this is just in 2024. We plan on increasing again in this budget. And then when you look at our fund balance again as a percent of revenue, we ended 2024 in the orange bar, and higher is better. The more percent of fund balance you have as a percent of revenue, the better. The stronger you are as a town. We ended 2024 in the orange bar, and we expect to end 2025 in the yellow bar. So we are moving in the right direction, kind of being from at the upper end of the bottom third to kind of squarely in the middle. So we are moving to continue to be stronger and stronger from town from a financial perspective. So kind of the net message on all of those charts are our management of our financials from a bond and from a fund balance perspective are moving in the right direction, and they're in a place that people that evaluate these things say we're in a good place. So I'm going to get in now to the budget details. But as you kind of look at this, I think what you'll see is that I think we've adequately funded the town's and education services. We're going to propose a tax increase that's in line with levels that have been approved in the past years, and actually slightly lower than would have been brought forward in the last few years. And we're maintaining the financial health of our town. So let me get into the budget now. So the first chart is the overall expenditures, and these charts have a lot of numbers, and I apologize for that because they get down to the dollar. But you can focus on the green boxes a lot. The green boxes are what the budget proposal is upcoming. So our budget proposal for expenditures is a little over $91 million next year, which is a growth of 4.3% from this year's budget. You can see this year's budget, we were growing 6%, so the rate of growth of our budget is actually coming down. We're not growing as fast as we had in the prior year. If you look at the line items, and we'll go through each of these line items in a separate chart, but you can see the town and the Board of Ed operations are fundamentally growing at about the same pace they were before. Our debt service, as I told you, continues to go up, but the rate of growth is slowing, and by next year it'll start to decline. And then the capital that we're paying for in our budget, so this is the stuff that was not shown in the last meeting, is basically at the same level, almost within $1,000 of what we are planning on spending this year. So that's how you get to the 4.3% increase. So I'm going to now kind of take you through each of the lines. First is our town operations. So our town operations, you can see, the proposal is a little over $23 million. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see the exact number, which is a growth of 3.85%. And if you look at where the year-to-year growth is coming from, almost half is coming from public safety. And then you can see where they come from the other areas. When you look at where we're investing here, the first $237,000 of growth is coming from status quo. But what that basically means is for the people that we have on board, salary increases for them of around 2.5%, and then the benefits. And I told you the benefits were growing at 11.5%. That's a little over $300,000 just for medical benefits increase. So medical benefits increase of $300,000, salaries 2.5%. That means everything else actually is coming down in aggregate a little bit. So really was scrubbed to make sure that we're spending as little as possible elsewhere. From the initiatives, you can see a lot of the initiatives are focused on the police. As you look at what's happening in our town, from 2020 through 2023, the police handled about 12,000 calls a year. Last year, that jumped up to between 16 and 17,000 calls, so a dramatic increase. And this year that we're in right now, it's running at about that same clip, 16 or 17,000 calls. So the amount of calls that have to be handled by each individual officer is just gone from, say, 400 calls per officer to over 500. It's really not a sustainable amount of calls being handled. So the initiatives are to add 2 new police officers to account for that. Now, we hopefully that 16,000, 17,000 level will kind of steady state at around that level now that we've gotten to it. But we do need the 2 new officers to handle the call volume, a part-time dispatcher, records clerk, then associated training ammunition, etc. The EMS personnel was in our contingency last year. We just had to move it into this bucket, so there's not really an investment there. We made an investment in a social services position that we paid for half a year in the last budget. We'll pay for a full year this budget. So from a year-to-year perspective, it goes up because you have to pay 2 halves instead of 1. And then there's not a lot more that we're making investment in. A little bit more in CLS outside maintenance now that the school isn't brand new. We don't get our maintenance for free, if you will. We used to pay for our turf cleaning in the capital plan. It's now operating where it should be. And then with a tax suit and with some union negotiation we have ongoing, our legal fees will go up. We expect that to be more of a one-time thing than an ongoing amount. And with early voting, we do need more support from our registrars, which is an incremental $38,000. So you can see that's where the incremental money comes from the town. And the pie chart is kind of just a view of each of the areas of our town and how much we spend. I'm just going to keep moving in the interest of time. From an education perspective, what I want to highlight is the first 2 lines are salaries and health insurance benefits. If you look at the percent of budget column, so the run right to the right of the green column, 80% of our education spending is salary and benefits for our education employees. And that is accounting for 70% of the increase. Again, about a 3% increase in aggregate for salaries and a little over 8% benefits, again, of which healthcare is 11.5%. So that's by far the biggest driver of the growth here. There is a fair amount of growth in transportation costs and in special education. Special education, we have more students requiring outplacement, and the cost per student of outplacement has gone up, which is something that I'm actually focused on with the Board of Ed on that. But then if you look at the other line items, fuel items, others, et cetera, those are fairly small increases on a year-to-year perspective, actually less than inflation. So I think the Board of Ed is squeezed pretty good on areas to help fund areas where we need. The total amount of incremental investments on the Board of Ed, and last year we had more investments. This year we have much less investments. It's only $101,000 in it's kind of the gray bar under the status quo. So only 101,000 incremental investments. The biggest piece being that we're going to have a halftime bilingual Portuguese based on the number of Portuguese speakers in the school. And then you can see just very few investments. So this is not a big investment year from a Board of Ed perspective. At the end of the day, after this budget's been looked at by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, jointly, we've asked the Board of Ed to remove $390,000 from this budget. So I think people know we don't tell the Board of Ed how to spend their money, but we're proposing that they find $390,000 of savings from the budget that they put in place, so that the growth that they have is at the 4.81%. And they're actively looking, should this budget pass, and how they implement that. Okay, debt service I'll talk about very quickly because I spent some time on it, but I just wanted to show, if you look over the years, our debt service has grown from 21-22 from 5.8 million to 6.2 to 7.7 to 8.8 to 9.1, and this is where it'll peak. So again, for the next couple of years, that number will start to decline and then stabilize and start to decline again. So not a surprise given the CLS debt that we took out, but it is something that we're dealing with, that we've had to fund that. And when the decision was made to do CLES, the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen knew this was coming, right? So we're able to plan for this, and that's why we're able to manage our overall tax increases with these kind of growths. And finally, capital. So in the last meeting, you saw the bonded capital column and a chunk of the other capital column. But you can see this is the total amount of capital that we're proposing, which is a little over $7.5 million if you look at the bottom line. The bonded capital 2,881, you saw that in the last meeting, $2.9 million from cash. Reserves are money that we put aside because we knew we were going to need to spend money on this, and so we put aside some every year until we needed it. We're looking to get grants, and hopefully we'll get more than that, but those are the grants we kind of counted on in the budget. And then other areas where outside service fund or excess revenue, et cetera. I won't go through each line item here, but I want to focus on a couple just so you can understand how it works. So in here, there's the top line. There's $500,000 for a new ambulance. Now in the past, we would have probably looked to bond that. But what we've done over time is we've put away $135,000 for the last several years. So we have $335,000 being held. And when we add this year's $135,000, which we'll pay out of our cash, tax budget, if you will, we have enough to buy that ambulance without having to bond it. So that's our strategy of trying to fund more of our town operations using cash and not bonding. And you'll see that in a couple different spots. Another big one, there was a Board of Selectmen meeting in the past where we're looking to put the high school baseball and softball fields under lights, which will give us a lot more capacity for large fields for our students to use. So that's $750,000. We're looking to get a state grant of a little over $500,000. We have reserves from actually from the CLS project, and then we'll have to pay out of cash $75,000. So that's one where it's key that we'll get a grant to be able to do that. But that's a great value if we can spend only about 10% of the $750,000 and get the lighting for those fields. You can see in a lot of other areas we're continuing to add to reserves because we know we'll need more money in the future. So going back up to public safety, we're putting away reserves for future fire truck purchases. That's for both fire companies, so that's $267,000. We are putting away reserves, or we had some reserves for the assessment under general government, the assessment to do our revaluations. That's a $200,000 project every 5 years. So we put away $40,000 a year so it doesn't have to be a one-off big time hit. Again, if there's questions on, and we're adding to reserves, sorry, if you go into public works, you can see halfway down, there's $270,000 being added to Caddy light and turf reserves, $270,000 reserves for the Brookfield High School track fields and courts, so that when time comes that we have to replace those, we won't have to bond when it comes to $1 million plus. We'll have that money already put aside. Again, so key to making sure that we can reduce the amount of bonding that we have to do going forward. I want to spend 1 minute on the schools because it is a big chunk. And again, I talked about this last meeting. I think everyone in the room was here for the last meeting. But there was a 10-year plan developed a few years ago to spend about $12 million and get the high school and Wisconsin in much better shape and actually being able to use for a long period of time, so we don't have to build new ones. So we fully funded that last year. This plan fully funds that as well. And you can see this is the total capital request for our schools. There's not a lot of small items in here. There's, between the two schools, $800,000 to repair and replace roofs and the associated ceiling tiles. Getting domestic water to Wisconsin, and we're hoping to get some grants on some of those, but we're not counting on them yet, given the state of where government grants could be right now. Fixing our AC and ventilation, upgrading our camera systems for security, and then replacing the gym flooring in Wisconsin. Those are all kind of big ticket items. Once you get beyond that, there's just a couple of very few small items there. You can see they requested a new vehicle, a new van to be able to transport things between schools. We all agreed we can get by with the used one. So we're really being pretty tight with our money here everywhere we can. The carpet tiles in the main office area, people are slipping on those, and it's a safety hazard, so we're not going to compromise safety in any of the capital or any of the budgets that we do. But you can see there's not like a laundry list of little things, and there's some things that would be really nice to be able to do. People brought up, we need a new scoreboard. The weight room needs some work. No question, but this year we've been very, very tight on how we're spending our capital. So that's the expenditures. If you look at the revenue, it's the same number, the $91 million, the revenue matches the expenditures, growing 4.3%. In general, everything is growing. You can see that the top line taxes current year, that's the taxes that we'll pay in our property taxes. That's growing 4.7%, slower than it did last year. Not a lot slower, but still slower, so it's moving in the right direction from 4.9 to 4.7. The big thing in here is that if you look at the one-time sources line, we had over $2 million of one-time sources, heavily driven by ARPA. That was the COVID funding that the government gave us, which has now been fully utilized, so that doesn't exist anymore. So we have much less of capability to use that. So we've taken that down to 1.2 million, almost 800,000 less. So despite taking almost $800,000 out of that revenue, we were able to hold the overall revenue growth and the tax growth actually less than it was last year. So which is a pretty good feat. And if there's more questions on the details on that, we can talk about it. So now the last piece is the mill rate calculation. So if you, the bottom line is that the proposed mill rate increase with a mill rate of 28.93 would be 3.69%, which again is less than this year's, which is a 3.87% increase, and is less than the year before, which was 3.79. And just as a kind of a point to keep in your head, we are paying more for that debt for Candlewood Lake. If we didn't have that debt increase, actually the growth would have only been 3.23%. Now, I did some quick checking of other towns. They're kind of in the same position we are. They haven't set their budgets for next year, but they're in the process. And if what they're proposing passes, and if what we're proposing passes, of the towns that already have it out there, we have the slowest growing tax increase of all the other. There's only 4 other towns that have published it right now, but all the other ones are well over 4%. Some are well into the 5%. So it's a reasonable tax increase given what's going on here and given what the past years. So I moved quickly. I hope that was clear. And I think at this point we're going to open for public comments and questions.
Any questions? Please come to the microphone, state your name. Sorry.
Tony Carr, 54 Indian Trail. First, I just want to say thanks for the great work the Board of Finance is doing to kind of pull this together. I do have a couple questions. First, the first slide that you had up there, you mentioned that, can you go back to your very first slide? Yeah, right there. So the first slide isn't more accurate to say with the resulting tax burden acceptable to town taxpayers, because not all residents are taxpayers, right? So I just think for clarity, if you're a renter here, for instance, and you don't have property tax, other than maybe your vehicle, you're not really paying. You're not bearing the burden of everything you're talking about here. Correct. Nice. On slide 7. So on slide 7, you show this. Now, number one, this is assuming that it's assuming a steady evaluation, basically the same evaluation that we had in 2021. We've got a new one coming up, I think, in 2026 or thereabouts. This is assuming the same tax eval, so you're going to get the same rates on the property taxes that you're getting now. Is that correct? Is that the assumption that's made here?
Yeah, so this is the amount of debt we have outstanding, so this is independent of...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe this wasn't the chart you wanted.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, it's not. That's not the one. I'm sorry, wrong slide. Let's just run this slide. Have we given any thoughts then to maybe sacrificing some of the new starts that you showed to just pay down on the principal on this? I mean, we're talking another 15 years that those of us that are paying taxes are paying for debt that was incurred long before we ever moved here. So why not get after that a little bit more quickly and really enforce a little bit more discipline in the system, and rather than allowing new starts, let's pay on principal and get this thing over with a lot sooner.
Well, we did take on the school's 20-year, not 30-year. And so we did look at that overall. And we do have a lot of town needs that we have to look at, whether you're here for 5 years, 20 years, or 50 years. We got to look at the long term.
Understood.
And the long-term health. And everything we've done is long-term health. If you've noticed in all of our audit books, you can go on this website, get all our audit books, the disciplines we do use is for future. Now, to put the burden on, we've tried to flatten out the taxpayer burden, being in the 3 to 4% range. If we started to get different, we're going to be at 5% one year, then 0. We're going to be all over the place. We're trying to flatten it out so the tax residents or the taxpayers, the owners, can manage this. And it's something that's relatable that they can deal with. So the pay down on the principal right now would only be a short-term process, right? We would have to increase.
You would increase the amount of interest.
We'd have to increase the tax rate to get there.
Would you?
Yes.
What I'm saying is if you knock out some programs that were allowing new start programs.
What new starts are you talking about?
You show, all right, well, I'll ask you. Can you show us your cut line? Can you show us what the requirements that were laid before you, what is not funded? Because that's going to help the audience determine the real, the discipline that you put in looking at this. Do you have a red line? Do you have funded requirements and unfunded requirements? And then why are there requirements? How is that analysis done? Because it's not clear to us. You're showing us charts with numbers. And I know you're looking at me with a funny grin, but I work in government. We're told you have the same budget as you had last year, deal with it. And then we go in and we take everything that we thought that we needed and we go back and we cut it. We're not going to do it this year, or decide it's not that important. Do we ever do those kind of disciplines? Do we tell the town, hey great, you're going to operate off of last year's budget, like it or not? It's possible to do. So we do it in the federal government all the time. So why not?
So from a capital, because we're talking about that from a capital perspective, the capital committee, when we started, the initial requests were well over $11 million. So a significant amount was cut out. The capital committee doesn't look at affordability. Because at the time we're doing it, we don't know what is affordable, right? We just look at, is it really needed? Is there some other way to solve it? Can it be pushed out? So we really look at what is the need, and then the process going forward is what's affordable. What I would say, and I want to make sure people understand this on this chart, the debt that we are suggesting that we do this year is the green bar, 26 going on. So that's how much we're adding. Of that, that's about $2.9 million. 2.2 is the schools.
So if we put a community center, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
if we put a community center police station in there, that's not those green bars, that's something different, right?
Right, that's just this year's,
Okay.
That's the 2.88, and we pay it off over 10 years. Okay, so the biggest chunk of that 2.9, which I'll show you, 2 of the 2.9 is the schools.
Okay.
If we don't spend that, and we decided to pay down principal or something, those schools get wrecked, and we can add building new schools in the out years, right? Not investing in putting new roofs on those schools would be a short-term savings and a long-term disaster, right? So those are the kind of thoughts that we put in place on the capital.
Understood, and I understand for capital investments. Got it. So maybe Marcia can speak to this. Where's the revenue that we generate in the town? Is there any kind of fee for service that we have? Do we look at our EMS for every time the EMS responds? I know that I've been billed before for fire and emergency services coming to me. How does that come back to the town in terms of revenue? How is that realized? That's not clear on our revenue intake. If somebody could just talk to that and how that plays out.
Go ahead, Marcia, you want to take that?
And do we have a cost model that shows fee for service for EMS, fire and emergency services, anything like that?
So the budget here is the general fund budget, and to talk about, one of the things you brought up earlier was why don't we pay down debt? And in governments, the thought is that we're going to have that school for 20 more years. It should be not the taxpayers today that pay 100% of that school. People that come into town 10 years from now should also pay that share. So that's part of the philosophy of governments and bonding for things. But back to the EMS, this is the general fund, that there's a number of different funds or pockets of money, columns of money that are in a government. When money is restricted for a specific purpose, it doesn't go in the government because it has to be used for that purpose. So the EMS money the EMS revenue is actually offsetting the other costs that we owe them. So we take all the costs of the EMS, we subtract about $1 million of revenue that we don't have to pay for with taxes, and you'll see that in the budget. There's other fees for services like Parks and Rec. They have a special fund so that your tax dollars aren't paying for other people's children or other adults to take programs. That's in a separate, it's called a special revenue fund, which you have those in the federal government too, so you're probably familiar with that. Fees for services, the library has some that we have some for the conservation properties. Does that answer the question?
It does. So I'm sure that underwrites a lot of decision making that you're doing here. I just think that for clarity when we're briefing the budget, I think we should show our revenues as well, rather than just doing the gloom and doom. Here's everything that we have to pay for and where your tax dollars are going. I think it just shows the give and take of government so people understand that are out there.
Yeah. So this is based on government accounting standards number 54 that delineates for us what goes into the general fund and what goes into the other funds. We could not, under generally accepted accounting principles, that particular standard, we could not put them all in the general fund.
Okay. And then what about your higher lag? Where does that money go? For instance,
Before we go farther, one I want to clarify about the government too. We ultimately, as a Board of Finance, don't dictate all the rules totally to this thing. The Board of Selectmen has a say, the Board of Education has a say. And ultimately, the town votes, not like in the government where the president decides and has overruling and says, this is the budget. Congress says, okay, it's okay. The voters don't then say, hey, we don't like that budget. So we have to put forth the budget that makes the town, and it's not gloom and doom. It's actually town services that we all like and have. So we're trying to provide at the best cost town services. If you start to look at, hey, we're going to make these cuts, what are you cutting out? Are you going to say the tax assessor's only going to be in the office for 10 hours a week now? Or are you going to say Parks and Rec, we're going to close all the fields? So when you say bring down the hammer, it's like you could bring down the hammer, but you're bringing this small town to a stop.
No, I'm not saying bring out the hammer. No, I said new starts is what I said. I didn't say
The
bring
new
out the
starts are always voted on by the public, so if we go to a police station, it would be presented to the town, and the majority of the people would vote. They voted down a library one time because they thought it was too much. They voted in a new school.
And-
So once 2,000 residents vote in a new school, what do? It's voted in. You have to manage the funds.
What about new starts in the Board of Education? Those aren't voted on by the town.
That's, the Board of Education has their own entity, and the town Board of Finance cannot dictate to them new initiatives. If you want to change
right.
the Board of Ed, you need to vote different members to the Board of Education, not the Board of Finance. If the true Board of Finance is what you're saying, if we said, cut $1 million off the Board of Education, cut $1 million off the town budget, the Board of Finance is now dictating operational things, because if we were to cut $1 million out of the town, you'd have to lay the services off.
You're not, no, I disagree with you. You wouldn't be dictating operational things. You would make the user have to make the tough decisions. It's not a dictation. You're just saying, here's your top line, and live within your means. That's all you'd be doing. But anyway, I digress. Let me go to my last point. So I was mentioning higher leg. So when my guess is that you have a payroll that you plan for an authorized strength or something of personnel that are assigned, be they educators or be they town employees. When those positions aren't filled, you have those funds that are being paid out. So does that higher leg go back into paying for maybe incentives, awards, overtime? How is that used? Or is it even significant, or is it just minuscule?
Well, to start the budget, the Board of Ed is already negative $200,000 on their salary line. So we put a negative contingency on the Board of Ed. So when teachers of higher rank retire and they bring in lower ones, it's already built in. So we've already reduced that and taken it out of the budget. The police also have $125,000 reverse contingency, or $120,000 reverse contingency on their side for labor. Inside the town, I think Brian explained it, whenever monies we save at the end of the year, 50% we'll try to put back into the budget to save the taxpayers in prior year or next years going forward, and 50% build up our capital fund, which is basically our operating cash fund.
Thanks. That's it. Thank you. I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other public comment? All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I do have one.
Take your time.
Pete Foshi again, 3 Greenview Road. Just a question on the police budget that you have there. You're showing 2 new officers, and you're saying that this has gone from 12,000 to 16,000 calls that they're answering during a 12-month period. Can you kind of elaborate on where all of these calls are and what's going on? Can you see what's happening with
In
it
the
now?
new buildings, there's a lot of calls to the new properties that are going up, and the new reporting rules are also causing more pressure on the police labor. So the hours and the calls plus the reporting has increased the needs of these people, the police requirements. So basically, you're a 1 to 500 ratio police to residents.
How many total police officers are there?
I think we have 39.
30.
Marcia, 39?
With this, it'll be 39.
39 for what, 17,000 people?
And they're finding that there are certain properties that are getting 40 to 50% of these calls that are in town right now. These are new properties.
No problem.
So this is a new strain, and this is what we're going through as well with these new building growths. As a small town, we're dealing with bigger town problems. So we're having to deal with more EMS calls and more fire calls, and it's something that we're learning. We're growing through it. It's new to us because we've been, I've been in Brookfield a long time. We're just and now we're getting to the point where we're a little bit bigger, and it's putting stress on these services. So.
What, you say you're seeing these, are you seeing crime rates going up too?
It's not really crime, it's more calls. It's just calls. Even for the ambulance, they're getting calls. EMS, yes. It's,
The EMS calls have gone up?
yes. What we've done, and one of the items that Brian mentioned was there's a liaison on the public health side. There's a position that we implemented. We're paying half of it more this year, $45,000. That's like an intermediate to try to reduce some of these calls. So if Mrs. Jones is calling for something, we can maybe take us some of the calls. So we're really trying to be proactive in the process.
And the new ambulance is $500,000.
And they've gone up, and they're still going up. Thank you. Any other public comment?
Yeah.
Tara Carr, 54 Indian Trail. Thanks, Brian, for all the work on the Capital Committee, Board of Finance. Wonderful work, as always. I know it's not an easy feat. My question, and this just came up recently, the Board of Ed published their flow chart on how to hire for the new superintendent. So I was just curious when I think that happened after this was prepared. So if, say, for instance, we can't find someone or the new person that they decide to onboard costs more, where will that money come from? Same thing for the assistant superintendent. Thank you.
Okay, so basically right now, the Board of Ed has the budget that we've presented to them. It's going to go to town referendum, and they're going to have to work within that budget to figure out how to manage this. As always, there is a process in our town that if the Board of Ed cannot manage within their budget, they have the right to go to the Board of Selectmen and ask for a special appropriation. At that point, the Board of Selectmen can approve it or not approve it, and then it would come to the Board of Finance. I think we had good deliberations with the Board of Ed. I think they understand this year's budget. They understand the constraints on the town this year as well. And I think we're all on the same page. If they understand what they need to do, and they're their own entity. And as always, if there's more funds needed, they have to go to the Board of Selectmen for an approval. So that's within their purview, the Board of Ed. That's a state mandate.
So, I'm sorry, we haven't had an update from the Board of Ed lately. Where are we on the amount in excess of the Board of Ed? You mentioned $200,000 of higher life savings, but what about the rest of the budget?
Currently now, with their $200,000, they made some freezes. They have to come back to us. It was an understanding it'd probably be about $360,000, and that was an agreement made to cover special ed. Because what we had told the Board of Ed is do not put any special ed students into the budget that you did not know. In the past, they'd always planned for maybe 1 or 2 special ed students coming into town, so they put it in their budget. What we did is we came to agreement to say, if you don't know they're coming in, we have money on the contingency side unless you use the process of going to the Board of Finance, or the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. Because if we didn't do that, they would have had to have put some contingencies on their side to allow for any special ed student needs. And we've seen these needs grow in the past few years, so we try to account. This year, they came to us earlier in the budget process, and they said we have students that we think are 90 to 95% sure they're going to need outplaced services, and that's why we put some money there to help them out already. So I think the Board of Ed is very clear on where we stood. We set a budget with them, and they understand what they need to do. Any other questions? Yes, sir. All right, you can have 4.
Very simple question, more clarifications. So my name is George Colossus. I live at 36 Barnaby Terrace. Intergovernment revenues. Can you explain what that is?
Go ahead, Marcia. You can give the better detail.
The bulk of this is education money from the state for education cost-sharing money, where we all put our money into the state and they dole it out a little bit to Fairfield County, a lot up to the Putnam Way. That's the bulk of it, but there are other intergovernmental revenues like for roads, and these are statutory formula grants that are set by the the state.
But they're primarily funds coming from the state, though?
They're all from the state, yes.
Anything from the federal government that comes our way, or is that going to stay from the state?
That's not in the general fund because it's a restricted revenue, that GASB 54 that I like to talk about, says that has to go into a separate fund, and you'll see that in the financial statements, every single grant that they get. Last year, we spent about $3 million of federal money.
Okay.
And on an ongoing basis, we spend about $3 million of federal money. So if that is cut, that we'll have to look at what happens for some special ed students, some disabled students, and some regular programs that have always been funded with federal money.
Okay. And my second question is just the tax base. So I know the budget's going up 4.3%. How much is the tax base going up? Because I see all the construction in the town, which is great. I see a lot of people coming in. We just had the thing about all the EMS calls and everything else. I was just curious, how much is that growing versus the budget?
Yeah, so that's the value of 1 mil. So that's growing a little under 1%.
Just under 1%.
Right.
Okay.
It's going about 26 million on a base of 2.9 million.
Where is that for?
That's the very first one, value of 1 mil.
Oh, 1 mil.
That's basically the tax rolls.
So with all the people coming into the town and everything, that's all that is adding more to the revenue?
Some of it hasn't actually been put on the rolls yet, right? So we do expect that this will continue to grow as some of that stuff comes
Is
up.
any of that factored in here in terms of the budget? Let's say, because you got stuff on the 4 quarters that are still building and they're going to be putting things in. Is that getting factored in here somewhere?
In out years. So this gets, right, the property values get locked, right, for the budget cycle.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I got the mic. Any other further questions?
Yeah. All right, with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for coming.